Hello, guys. Thank you very much for joining in. We're going to be starting out with the first session of FRM Level 2. And primarily, we have started out with the market risk book. And this topic, which is estimating market risk measure, is actually a continuation of your VAR topic. Certain things are repeated, certain things are exclusively given over here, which was not covered in your FRM Level 1. Okay. And before we enter into this chapter, okay, the basic details about this chapter, they have given you some introduction or warm up, which we can see over here. The warm up details are given over here, which primarily talks about how the data is used in the when you want to find var and the expected shortfall. So they are first talking about the data, basic structure of data, and then they are taking you towards the var calculation. So let us start with that discussion of data. So if we read this first paragraph, this is again a repeat from level 1. What they want to highlight in this paragraph explicitly is that whenever we talk about var, okay, or whenever we talk about these risk measures, okay, our general discussion is that we are talking about losses. So when we address that, we address it in a particular way. For example, if a portfolio is expected to decrease by $1 million, okay, we talk about it in a sense like this: expected loss is going to be $1 million. We don't say expected profit is going to be $1 million. So this first paragraph is just a small clarification that they wanted to highlight, that generally we talk from the perspective of loss because we are talking about a risk measure. Okay. And when we have clarified this concept, okay, then they've moved towards the profit and loss data. That means the core data which is used to calculate returns and which is used to calculate standard deviation, which is used in your var calculations. Okay. So the first and basic thing they're talking about is profit and loss data, PNL data. Okay. So if you have seen in level 1, okay, suppose you have entered into a particular trade and you realize that you suppose you bought the particular trade for say example at $100, and during that period you got some income. Okay. So that is explicitly and you have sold that asset at a higher price, so you will be able to identify the either you have made profit or loss on that particular trade. So let me give you an example. Suppose I'll give you a very simple example. Suppose at time 0, you bought something at 100. Okay. And then, so I'm marking it as negative because I have paid 100 to get some asset. And then after, say, for example, at 1 year, I've been able to sell this asset for 110. And exactly on the same day before selling, I got $2 as the income from that asset. So how do I write whether I've made profit or loss? So primarily, whatever income that I've generated, I will write that first minus the expense. Okay. This is the basic structure of PNL. And this is a very simple, basic understanding. If I want to take you towards the book, so this section gives you that idea: 110 plus 2 minus 100. Okay. So kindly write it down next to the book that you have so that you remember that these terminologies are not very difficult. Okay. Now this discussion, okay, if you look at GARB book, they have added some one or two more points related to it. So I'll be taking you towards that section now. Okay. So when we read the GARB book, so they are primarily giving you the input related to the similar part, which is 110 plus 2 minus 100. Okay. But they have given this additional part. See, the reason they are talking about this is that all the data points are not on the same time. So if I go back to my example, see, this is time 0. Okay. And this is time 1. So we can deal with this difference in two ways. Okay. Would be the first way would be to discount this 110 and 2 back to time 0. This is one way to do it, because when we are minusing, okay, and we are identifying profit or loss, both the data points are on different times. So it is not correct, because in time value perspective, both are not same. So that is the reason we are looking out for some adjustment. So first adjustment could be to discount that 110 plus 2 and bring it back to the present value. Okay. And then we consider and then we compare it with 100. Okay. That is one way to do it. The second way would be to bring this $100, which is at time 0, to time 1, and then consider whether there's a profit or loss. So these are the two ways through which we can identify whether the gain that we have, profit or loss that we have got, is essentially important or not. Okay, or primarily, how is it correct, is it done correctly or not? Okay, now let us talk about this example and see if we talk about this. So the first method that I said is about this 110 plus 2, bringing it back over here. The second method is bring this 100 over here. I'll go back to the content which is available in the GAR book and I will try to highlight that part. So this is the first adjustment. What they're doing is PT plus D. They are discounting it back and then minusing 100 out of the same. Okay. The second method is this. What we are doing is we are taking the 100 to the time frame of 1 and then we are using or doing the adjustment. Then we are doing the adjustment. Fairly simple. I'll show you one number in Excel, very simple calculation just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Suppose at time 0, I'm just zooming in. Suppose at time 0, we had $100. At time 1, we had 110, plus we got $5 on the same date after 1 year. So normal method is to take 110 plus 5 minus 100. That's the first basic method. But if you want to do adjustment, what we can do is we can take the present value of the 110 plus. So can you see this entire thing is 110 plus 5. I've done the present value with a rate of interest of 5% taken in the example and then minus 100 from it. The other method would be take the future value. So can we see that the future value of 100 is taken into consideration and then we have calculated the PNL. Okay, so these are the two basic adjustments that we can do to make sure that our returns that we the profit or the returns that we want to calculate is in sync and on the same timeline. Okay, so going back to the book, we have completed till here and I'm just taking a quick pause. Is there a query that anybody has? Okay, moving towards the next section. So right now we have talked about only the data points. Okay, we are not talking about returns, which we will be talking now. Okay, so if you look at this section which is available on the screen, okay, if you look at this part, they are talking about arithmetic return and geometric return. Now what is arithmetic return? It's a very simple basic example which I'll try to show it to you over here. I'm just zooming in. Okay, so suppose if I have asset price available, okay, for particular days. So I have asset price, the first asset price that I have is, for example, 41.81. The second asset price I have is equal to 42 point something, and then I'm taking the returns. This is simple and pure. This is simple and pure. What you're doing is your first thing what you did. I'm connecting it back to my example. Okay, suppose I have sold an asset at 110. I bought the asset at 100. So I'm going to do like this. Okay, so this is the arithmetic return. Gaurav, I'll come to your query, kindly wait. Okay, this is the arithmetic return logic where we are just taking the straight away percentage. Okay, you can have a look at this example. If there is a income in between, suppose there is a $5 income, then I will write like this. Very simple. Taking a quick pause and taking you towards the book. Kindly have a look at the same thing. Okay. The basic assumption that arithmetic return does is that whatever income that you've got in between, you're not going to earn any income or any growth on that part. Okay, so that is one very strong assumption which you have to remember, that interim payments do not earn any return. That is an assumption indirectly taken into arithmetic return. When we talk about geometric return, it takes into consideration that all the interim payments are continuously reinvested. Because if we look at geometric return, it's kind of continuous return. I'll come to this part in terms of the calculation, but I'll first show you the formula. Look at the formula. What they're primarily trying to do is they're taking the log natural of the latest price divided by the old price. Okay, if I take you towards the next section, or basically the next part in the calculator, okay, so the same data points, I've just taken log natural of 42 divided by 41. 42 divided by 41. Okay, I want you guys to have a quick read of these two parts, the arithmetic return and the geometric return. Kindly make sure that your video is not active. Everybody who's joining, please make sure that the videos are not active. Kindly go through these, both of these, arithmetic return and geometric return, and give me a quick confirmation. Gaurav, answering to your query. Gaurav, answering to your query. Why the present value was not equal to the future value of 100? See this, the first example that we are talking about. So we are bringing back this to over here. Okay. And then whatever that value is, if we do the present value, that present, let us assume that present value is X, then you will take this as the answer. Right? I hope you're clear on the query. How will it be equal? I'm not very sure. Because these numbers, when you bring it back, it's not going to be obviously equal to 100, no? Because it's 105, 110 plus 5. Right, Gaurav? Perfect, right? If there is still a query, let me know, or else we'll address it at the end. Don't worry. Going back to the book, I'm assuming everybody has read the content, arithmetic return, geometric return. Till now, everything is just a repeat of what you have done in level 1, because we are only talking about the data or the historical data point. Okay, there is one small aspect which was there given in your book, okay, which is called as the loss profit data. I hope everybody is able to see the screen. Now this loss profit data, okay, so this is something, this is basically just a way of representation, because the diagram which I'm going to show you, okay, which is there from the institute book, is primarily in the loss profit data. Till now we have been talking about profit and loss data. Okay, so all the profits were shown in positive. Okay, if we talk about P&L data, all the profit was shown as positive and all the losses were shown as negative. But when we talk about loss and profit data, all the profit will be given negative data points and this will be given positive. This is just a way of highlighting the data. There is no difference, there is no incorrect thing that is happening. So don't worry about it. Okay, it is basically how the banks use it in their calculation. Okay, we'll show you the diagram which connects back to the loss profit data example also. Let us start with historical simulation. Okay, one more quick confirmation from you guys. I've just completed till here. Is everybody okay till this point? Give me a quick confirmation on chat. All good? Perfect. Let me take you towards the next section. In case I miss anybody's query, do not worry, we'll take it at the end also. Historical simulation. Okay, this historical simulation you have kind of done, okay, but there is a slight variation. So what is happening is that a lot of the authors, they have their different method of identifying the var point, okay, and which you will see over here also. If I give you a very basic example, then what we were doing in level 1. I'll just quickly give you a summary. Suppose if I have the say for example 7 lowest data, and I've sorted that 7 lowest data in my example. Suppose it is negative 40%, negative 35%, negative 33%, negative 30%, negative 27%, negative 20%, negative 19%, negative 18%. Okay, and suppose this data point, this returns that I had, okay, I had initially, say for example 100 data points or 100 returns, and if I'm taking 5% var, okay, then there were two ways through which we were doing it in level 1. So if I take 5% of 100, it is coming at around 5 data point. That means the fifth lowest data point. So this is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So one method was to select this negative 27%. The other method was primarily to take the average of 27 and 20% and then get the answer. So it has to be around 23.5%, negative 23.5%. That was one method which we saw in FRM level 1. Okay, but over here explicitly what the book is also talking about, okay, is that we will have to take the n plus 1. That means we got 5 as the answer, the 5% of 100, we got 5. You have to take 5 plus 1. That means your answer is going to be this straight away. So what it essentially tells you, that you have the 5 lowest data available below this point. So for the exam, when you do for FRM level 2, this is the logic that you have to remember. It has to be n plus 1. Okay, taking you back to the book, and again the same concept is there. I'm going to ask you to read the content, read this paragraph and focus on this. This is nothing but 5% of 100 data points plus 1. Okay, read this entire first paragraph. Perfect. Now, one more small point which I wanted to highlight is this. This is called as alpha. Okay, normally when we talk about var, if suppose I want to talk about 5% var, this same 5% var can be also written as 95% var. So we know by logic that both of them means the same thing, and they have given the logic, or they have given the example also for your understanding over here. And this example is similar to what we had in your FRM level 1 in the building blocks of risk management topic. So what they did is they had, say, around 1,000 monthly returns, okay, for a security. They sorted that and they created a distribution, and they wanted to find 95% var. That means 5% var. So they went ahead and they started looking out for that data point which could bifurcate the 5% data, and they got a number as negative 15.5%, and that became your var percentage. Once you have the var percentage, you multiply with the total value of the portfolio, and then you get $1,55,000 as the var dollar amount. Okay, this is also an example. Read this example and look at the diagram which has been given over here in the book. So this negative 15% primarily bifurcates your 5% data point. Kindly read that paragraph and look at the diagram, please. Okay, perfect. I'm going to move towards the example. This is also similar to what we had in level 1. Okay, now they are talking, they have given you two different examples to talk about two different aspects. The first one is basically talking about, say, for example, if I have 100 data point, okay, and I want to find 5% var. So by logic, it is going to be 5% of 1000 data point. That has to be 50. But we just now said that, okay, it has to be +1. So it has to be 51st lowest data that we are going to be taking care into. So this example just reiterate the points which we have seen in the previous section. Okay. In the past historical FRM exams, we have also taken directly 50th data point. That is also there. Okay. But the latest trend has been 50+1. So you can read this section. This is just giving a commentary that in the past FRM exams, they have also taken alpha into n. That means 5% into 1000 directly 50th observation. But over here we are taking alpha into n +1. Kindly read the topic, read that paragraph, professor's note. And we're going to be moving towards the next example. Okay, this example is nothing but you understanding VAR from the normal distribution perspective. Okay, I'm just zooming in. So what is happening over here? So if we assume that the underlying data is standard normal distribution and there is a 5% VAR that we want to find, then we will have to understand that one-tailed, because VAR was always one-tailed number, right? I'm just quickly looking out for some numbers from you guys so that to reiterate the points which we have seen in level 1. One-tailed and two-tailed. Can you guys first give me the details of one-tail? 90% one-tail, what would be the number? 90% one-tail, what would be the number? 1.28, right? Perfect. 95% is going to be 1.6. It's actually 1.645. That's correct. What is 99%? I want you guys to answer. 99%, 2.33. Perfect. Okay, we also know that the two-tailed numbers for 90% is again 1.645. These two matches, right? Then you have 1.96, then you have 2.58. Whenever we are talking about VAR, we are explicitly talking about one tail. And hence, for a normal distribution, the tail, okay, when we talk about the tail, the value 1.645, the negative one, this is the point which bifurcates the 5% area. Okay, hence, if you go to the book, in this example, they have explicitly taken 1.645, which is 5% critical value of the table. And this is the left side of the table that we are explicitly focusing on because we are talking about VAR and which is risk measure. Kindly look at this example. Recall that VAR is a one-tailed test. Perfect. Taking you towards the next paragraph or the next slide. Okay. When we talk about historical simulation, okay, the major thing is, since we are using historical data, because what we are doing in historical simulation is we are taking the historical prices and we are calculating returns, and that return is what we are using to calculate the answer. Okay, calculate the VAR or the expected shortfall. The basic assumption that we have in historical simulation is that whatever has happened in the past is going to get continued in the future. If there is a shift in the market, if there is a structural change in the market, then that belief is also changed, and hence we cannot use historical simulation. So read this paragraph, which explicitly talk about the problems with historical simulation. All good? I'm going to move towards the parametric estimation approach. Now, in this parametric estimation approach, we are going to be finding VAR in two different ways. The first way is known to us, which is a normal method, which is delta normal VAR. And the second is a new formula, which we have not seen in level 1, which is a log normal return. Okay. Generally, there is more chances that they might ask you on a log normal return basis calculation. Okay. So if you read this first paragraph, they are talking about, okay, finding the VAR when the underlying data follows a normal distribution, or finding the VAR when the returns follow a log normal distribution. So first we're going to be entering into the normal VAR. Okay. What was the basic formula of delta normal VAR that we talked about in the level 1? We said this. Okay. And this is going to give me the percentage VAR. When I multiply it with the asset price, I get the dollar value. Okay. But see, entire VAR percentage or VAR dollar value, it is actually a loss that we are talking about. So by default, there is a negative sign over here. When I open up the bracket, okay, when I open up the bracket, it basically, okay, actually it's like this. You have to behave like this. So we are generally, this negative part, okay, is highlighted in terms of the mu component. Okay. Now, in some of the books, what they have done is they have taken the negative outside the bracket. And in some of the cases, they have directly taken negative over here and they have hit like this. Now, why are we taking negative? Primarily because we are talking about the left hand side. Okay. And if you read this paragraph, they are talking about the same negative over here. Okay. I want you guys to have a read over here in this part. Look at the formula. This is for VAR percentage, because till the time we multiply asset price, it is not going to get converted into dollar value. Okay. One more important line, VAR cutoff will be the left tail of the return distribution. That means when we look at the tail, this cutoff point is going to be on the left hand side of the distribution. Okay. So read this first paragraph. Perfect. Basic example of VAR. It is like this. Okay, I'll just repeat what I said. This was the basic formula that we had. Okay, and we used to get the answer over here. But since this is negative, okay, so whatever answer that we are getting, okay, when we multiply it with the dollar amount, whatever answer that we are getting, it is like this. Hence, we are adding negative over here. Okay. Right, Bhakti? Moving towards the paragraph which is given over here. I want you guys to read this paragraph. Now, what they're explicitly highlighting, see, the mu that we are talking about, the sigma that we are talking about, is directly coming from the population. But in reality, we might not have the liberty of having the population data. So primarily, we would be looking out at sample data points. So kindly read that paragraph. Yes, Jinesh.
Sir, it is mu minus z into sigma or mu plus z into sigma?
This is plus, no?
Sir, so then when the minus sign comes, so
It is not
both
outside
should,
the bracket. It is not outside the bracket.
okay, it is not outside the bracket. Okay.
Okay. So I'm assuming everybody has read that. Kindly read this paragraph. They're talking about generally we have to work with sample mean and the standard deviation. Perfect. Let me take you towards the example. Now, in this example, they want to find 95% VAR and they want to find 99% VAR. This is similar to what we did in the level 1 delta normal approach. Okay. So if we want to find the 95%, the number that we have is primarily your negative 1.645. So we will primarily take 1.645, and then this is going to be 2.33 because we are talking about one tail. So we can look at these numbers to 1.3 and 1.645. This has been used over here. Kindly look at the question. Slightly unlikely that they might ask you a question directly connected to delta normal. They might ask you a question related to log normal returns. Yes. Okay. I'm assuming that the people have seen the question, and it is again just a repeat of level 1. Okay. There's a slight variation that they have highlighted over here. Okay. Similar logic, the point over here being similar. Okay. What they wanted to highlight over here, if I, and else I'll just directly take you toward the question. Okay. That they are multiplying a dollar asset value and they're getting you with the dollar answer. Okay. Rest entire process is same, 1% and 5% process is same. Okay. And generally what we if we have more number of data points, okay, and we have the arithmetic return, we assume that it is normally distributed. This is coming from law of large number. If it is normally distributed, then only we can use the value z, or else we cannot use the value z. Okay. Now once you've seen the question, now just read this paragraph and look at this formula. Perfect. I'm assuming everybody has seen that part and completed till arithmetic return. I'm just taking a quick confirmation from you guys. Is everybody okay till here? Simple. Perfect. This next formula, which I expect they might ask you in the exam, and which they have asked in one or twice two exams before, okay, is primarily the log normal var. Okay, the basic structure is same. Yeah, they first find the percentage var and then they multiply with the asset value to get to find the var in dollar terms. But since it is continuously distributed or primarily log normal distributed, you have this e in the logic over here. Okay, and that is why this formula becomes slightly different. So you'll have to remember this part and marking it as star. Okay, marking it as star. Read this paragraph. Okay, there is one important line over here which is on the first part itself. It is bounded by 0. Why? Because I hope you remember from your level 1, the log normal distribution is bounded by 0. It cannot go below 0. Hence, generally when we talk about the asset price, we want to showcase it as a log normal distribution, because asset price cannot go below 0 to counter the problem of negative asset price. So when we started this chapter, we talked about arithmetic return. We talked about geometric return. So geometric return is primarily your log normal, because when we use the formula, we also did this log natural upon this latest stock price divided by stock price ST minus 1. Right? So look at this calculation, and then we'll move towards the formula. Okay, one thing which you have to remember over here is that it's mu minus z. Okay, mu minus z, because there is a minus which is outside also. Whatever answer we are going to get, okay, there is a bigger minus outside. When you open up the bracket, it will be again minus mu plus alpha into, sigma into z at a broader logical level. I want you guys to see the numbers right now. Okay, look at the calculation right now. The numbers 5% and 1% is still going to be same. Okay, this is the important part, and mark this calculation or sum as double star, important for the exam. You can expect a straight away plug and play kind of example in the question, a question in the exam. Okay, Now, till now, we have not seen anything explicitly different from level 1, very extractively different. But now, hence we move towards the next sections, that we'll be able to find certain parts connected to it. One more small point which has been highlighted over here, which primarily talks about when we look at arithmetic return and when we look at geometric return. Okay, since geometric returns are taking the data points or the whatever payments that we are receiving, it is continuously invested. Okay, so when we take when you want to find something for shorter period of time, then the arithmetic return and geometric return will give you answers close by. But when we look at a longer time horizon, geometric return will give you a bigger answer as compared to your arithmetic return. The basic reason being geometric returns consider that whatever cash flow that we are going to be getting, it is getting reinvested again and again. Yes, Darshan, answering to your query. So first you will have to calculate this part, 0. This, and then you'll have to take second ln, okay, second ln, and then you have to do that further process. Okay, I'll be looking at the module quiz at the end. I'll be taking care of the module quiz at the end. I'm just directly going towards the next section of the topic, which is expected shortfall. Okay, now this expected shortfall, we have seen about it in the level 1, a glimpse of it. We have seen small basic calculation. Similar type of understanding is also covered over here in level 2, in this chapter at least. So what is expected shortfall? It is also called as conditional VAR. Okay, in a very simple language, VAR was not telling us that, okay, what all, when there is a VAR breach, how much loss it is going to be. It only talks in terms of percentage. So suppose if this is my VAR point, okay, and these all black lines are my points which are above VAR point. Okay, so what does expected shortfall talks about? Expected shortfall simply takes the average of all of these data points, and it gives you a magnitude that whenever the VAR is going to get breached, on an average, this is what you might lose. Okay, so ES primarily focuses on the magnitude of the data, magnitude of the loss, which was missing in VAR, Okay, suppose this entire section, okay, obviously was having alpha as the area, because this entire area is alpha, right? So in level 1 also, we read about how exactly the weightages will be given to each data point, each data point. So the weightage is generally 1 upon 1 minus confidence level, which is equal to 1 upon alpha. What does it mean? It means all the data points will be given equal weightage. All the data points, the black data points which are available over here, all of them will be given equal weightage. That is the basic idea about expected shortfall. Taking you towards the book, okay, and they have taken an example where they found that the VAR is primarily sitting at 95. Okay, so what you can do is, this is again simulation. Okay, so they have run a lot of simulation. What they have tried to find is at 96% what is going to be the VAR number, at 97 what is going to be the VAR number. So we have 4 data points which are above that actual VAR point. Okay, so we have taken an average of that, and that is coming at around 2.003. This is nothing but your expected shortfall. So whatever those numbers were, 1.75, 1.88, 2.05, we have taken the average and it is coming at 2.003. Okay, but there is one more point which is given over here, which is theoretical true value. So when I keep on running simulation for say 10,000 data points or 50,000 data points, and if I increase the number of iteration, then primarily my actual expected loss, that is called as theoretical true value of expected loss, that should be around 2.063. So when I increase my number of data points, I will reach towards that. That is what it wants to highlight. I want you guys to read this paragraph and look at this diagram table properly. There is one more point which I would highlight over here. But first, look at the paragraph and look at the diagram, figure. Well, good. Now there is one point which is also written over here, this point, and if you read this two lines, what they're saying is that to maintain the same interval of mass 1%, the tail is becoming more and more thinner. What does it mean? The gap between the var value is increasing. Okay, now this is more logical, right? If I show you in a very simple way, think about this. Suppose this is the tail. Okay, and suppose at 5% point, you have 1.645. This is the 5% point. Now from here till say 4%, I'm just taking hypothetical numbers over here, say 1.89. Okay, this entire area represents 1%. Now since the tail is getting, this line is going down, you will have to move further to come to cover that 1%. That means your point is going to move further. The difference between this and this, that means 1.645 and 1.89, is not going to be equal to difference between this and this, 1.89 and 2.33. Why? Because since the tail is becoming more and more thinner as we move toward the left hand side, this line will have to be more on the left hand side to maintain that gap of 1%. I hope everybody is able to understand the logic. Hence the gap between the var points is increasing, right? And if you, this is fairly, if you can also cross check this by looking at the cumulative distribution data points, and you will find that when you take 1% gap, the Z values that you get, the gap between them keeps on increasing. The same thing has been highlighted in the first two lines, okay, that the var increase, that means this gap is increasing. Okay, I'm assuming everybody is with me. Also read this last paragraph. Okay, what they're saying is that we will be able to reach this theoretical true value. That means my expected shortfall answer will get closer and closer to 2.063 if I keep on taking heavy number of data points. Okay, when they're saying high number of vars, it basically means high number of data points. Okay, because if you look at this, the 96% var was nothing but the 96% data point. This is 1.75, 1.88. This represents your Z values, the standard deviation. Kindly look at this content. Okay, kindly look at this last paragraph and give me a quick confirmation if you guys are comfortable with the figure and also with that paragraph. Sanjana, answering to your query, theoretical value means, see, right now I have only 4 data points in the tail. I have only 4 data points. If suppose, might be because the number of data points which I've taken for the calculation is very small, say 100 or 200. But if I keep on increasing, there'll be more data points in the tail. So when I try to take the average of that, my answer is going to be closer to this 2.063. N over here, yes, N represents the iteration. Jinesh, N represents your iteration, which is 10,000. Okay. So this is where we talked about the expected shortfall, conditional var. Then we are moving towards the coherent risk measure. Okay. Coherent risk measure, I hope you guys remember there were certain properties of coherent risk measure. Any clarity on that? Can you guys name that? What was the first one? Monotono. If I'm not wrong, monotonicity was the first one. Then subadditivity. Then positive homogeneity. There was one more. Translation invariance. These 4 properties were primarily from your FRM level 1, which talked about if we want to find a coherent risk measure. What does coherent risk measure means? A very good risk measure. These 4 things should ideally be there. Okay. Now, out of this, the sub-adequacy was very important for us because VAR was not having that sub-adequacy, but expected shortfall was having it. What was sub-adequacy? If I have, I'm just giving you a quick reference. If I have two assets, both of them are having 10 unit of risk. If I create a portfolio with A and B, including both of them, if the correlation between them is equal to 1, then the entire risk of the portfolio is going to be 20 because there is no diversification benefit. But if the correlation is less than 1, my risk of the portfolio should be lesser than 20, say for example 18. But VAR was following this in the normal situation, but for in a non-normal situation, this sub-adequacy property was not being followed properly. That was major problem with respect to VAR. And hence we move towards expected shortfall because expected shortfall was having sub-adequacy. So this discussion, which we are going to be talking about over here, they are talking about the same covariant risk measure. Okay. And we also talked about spectral risk measure in level 1. That is nothing but the same concept of covariant risk measure. What they're talking about is they are saying that, okay, when you have the returns distribution, when you have this return distribution, okay, there are certain data points which are standing over here. What you are supposed to do is, if you want to find VAR or any risk measure primarily, what you are going to do is take all these data points and give weightage to all of them. Okay, but that weightage would depend upon primarily the risk aversion function. That means the user is going to define what weightage it is going to be. Okay, but all the data points which are there, everybody should get the weightage. Okay, that is a basic structure of the covariant risk measure. I'll take you toward the book and I will ask you to read the first 3 lines. Kindly read the first 3 lines. Okay, assuming everybody has seen that first 3 lines. So when we generally talk about covariant risk measure, we are saying that we'll have to give weightage to every data point. Okay. Now, when we talk about VAR, what VAR is doing is that it is taking that one particular data point and giving entire 100% weightage to that data point. Okay, so it is saying, okay, I'll give weightage to everybody, but I'll give 100% to this data point and 0 to everybody else. So that was VAR. What was expected shortfall? Expected shortfall was saying that I'll give weightage to every data point, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tail and I'm going to give weightage, equal weightage to this tail, and everybody else will get 0 weightage. I'm giving weightage to everybody, right? But when expected shortfall was giving weightage to tail, this is again what I have been talking about. The weightage was this 1 upon 1 minus confidence level or equal to 1 upon alpha, right? That was the basic idea of giving weightage to the tail, right? So this same thing is being talked about over here from this part till this part. Read these 3 lines. They're talking about expected shortfall. It gives equal weightage of 1 upon alpha to the tail, but all the other quantiles, the weights are given as 0. This is about expected shortfall. When we talk about VAR, okay, the VAR is basically taking only one data point and everybody else is giving 0 weightage. That is also being mentioned over here. One second. No, explicitly they have not written. Yes, they have not taken explicitly, but they've talked about expected shortfall. The logic is same for VAR also. It takes only 1 point, give 100% weightage, and everything else is 0. Now look at this part. Read this section. What they are talking about it, when we are looking at expected shortfall estimation, the tail is divided into equal probability slices. Tail is divided into equal probability slices and then multiplied by corresponding quantiles. What is this quantile? This word quantile means I'll just show you the diagram again. So if this is my tail, so these data points are called quantiles. Okay, so each data point is getting a particular weightage. Okay, so don't get confused with that word quantile. It simply means the data point. Okay, if under expected shortfall, the quantiles which are in the tail will get equal weightage. But when we talk about more general coherent risk measure, everybody should get weightage as per the risk aversion function. As per the risk aversion function. Okay, which primarily means the highest loss should be given more weightage as compared to the lowest loss. Read this paragraph. All good? Let me take you towards the next section. Okay, over here where they are doing a lot of slicing. So what they have done is they have tried to take, suppose there are 10 data points or 10 quantiles. So what they will do is they will take the entire distribution and they will bifurcate the entire distribution into 10 slices. Okay, each slice is basically that 10% gap. Okay, for example, the 10% which is going to be start from the lowest, okay, it will be from the lowest point till negative 2.816. Similarly, the 20th percentile is going to be till negative 0.84. So if I want to show it to you in the diagram, it should look like this. This is the 10th percentile point. This is the 20th percentile point. This is the 30th percentile. So it will keep on going till we reach the 100. It's nothing great. What they're simply doing is they have taken the entire distribution, they've divided it into the gap of 10 percentage, and they've taken the quantile values. Okay, that this quantile value or this standard deviation represents the lowest 10%. This standard deviation represents the lowest 20%. Okay, I want you guys to read this entire part. All good. I'm moving to the next paragraph. Okay, now whatever n that we are choosing, okay, now over here in the example we had an n of 10. So the quartiles or basically the slicing that we are going to be doing would depend upon how many n's we are having. If you're taking n as big, there'll be more smaller slices or more smaller bifurcation that is going to happen, right? So if we look at this line, the intuition is that as the n increase, the quantiles will be further into the tails where more extreme of the distributions are located. That essentially means how much bifurcation that we are doing. It depends upon the total number of n. So if the n is 1000, each quantile will get lower percentage, right? And the tail will go towards more the left hand side. That is being covered in this last paragraph. This is just trying to connect it back with the previous paragraph of slicing. Nothing extra has been done. Coherent risk measure is more sensitive. The higher the number of n, the more slicing and more we are going to move towards the left hand side. Yes, Darshan?
Sir, in this second last paragraph, the second last sentence, next each quantile is weighted. Can you explain this sentence?
So each quantile means the each data point. Suppose over here, the data point was negative 1.28. The data point over here was negative 0.28. So these are all standard deviation. These are all data points. We'll have to give weightage to them to find the risk measure. Na?
Okay.
So for example, when we were doing expected shortfall, you took all the data points on the tail and you did the average. When you're doing average, you did equal weightage. So you hit them with the weightage to find the expected shortfall. Similarly, where whatever quantiles that you have to give weightage as per the risk aversion to find that risk measure.
Okay, got it, sir. Yeah.
Let's everybody kindly complete reading till here and give me a quick confirmation on chat. Answering to the query, Gaurav, that you had. See, when I keep on increasing my n, okay, the tail would go more and more towards the left hand side, right? Why? Because see, the slices or the percentage is going to be very, very small now because I have more and more data points. So previously, if suppose 5% was coming over here, because I was having my entire, because my gaps were bigger. As I have more and more data points, think logically, if there are so many data points over here, the fifth lowest data point or sixth lowest data point has to go towards the left hand side. Do you agree, Gaurav? So it essentially means my var is going toward the theoretical true value, var and the expected shortfall. I'm connecting it back to Sanjana's question also. So when I have more and more data points, the n increases, my var point and the expected shortfall point will move more towards the left hand side. Right, Jinesh? Perfect. So I'm moving towards the next point. Now this next concept is slightly tricky in the sense it has some calculation in it, but I'll be going slow over here because I want to and make you understand the logic, what they're trying to do. Okay. See, over here they are trying to find a confidence interval. So whatever var that we are getting, so ultimately what is var? The var is your standard deviation. Okay, I'll explain you that logic first, and then we'll go towards the confidence interval part. So when we talk about a distribution, okay, this is my average. Okay, and suppose if I come to know, okay, my 5% var is this 1.645. Okay, we use that word, right? 1.645, 95%, 90%. What is this point? This is basically this much standard deviation away from the mean. This much standard deviation away from the mean. Now, when we talk about this data point, okay, I'm just zooming in into that tail now. Suppose if this is my tail and we have this 1.645. What we are trying to do, see, this is my var number because I represent when we also do the calculation, okay, this one, okay, what I'm trying to do is I'm taking this z value as 1.645. Why am I taking? Because I'm saying that in a standard normal distribution, the 5% point is 1.645 away from the mean. Okay, for your case primarily, okay, it is going to be this much standard deviation away. Why? Because my standard deviation and the standard normal distribution standard deviation is not same. Because in a standard normal distribution, the standard deviation is 1, right? But if suppose I have a normal distribution which is having a different data point, say for example, I'm coming to that topic, okay, I'm just connecting it on the point. If I have a normal distribution which has a mu of 50 and a standard deviation of 5, okay, so when we used to do confidence interval, what we used to do is we used to go down and go up, okay, but when we were going down, so what we used to do is to do mu minus sigma into z, okay, sigma into z. Now this entire thing, okay, we were saying that, okay, I'll take sigma as 5 because my question was giving 5, and my z value, okay, was primarily, say for example, 1.96. Why was I multiplying 1.996? Primarily because I was saying in a standard normal distribution, it is that 5% point is 1.96 standard deviation away, but that means approximately 2 standard deviation away. But in your distribution, since your standard deviation is 5, When I multiply this, I get 10, because it essentially means in your case, we have to go 10 data points or 10 area down to reach that point. Right? That is the reason I was multiplying Z with my sigma. Okay. So I hope everybody is in sync with what I'm saying. I'm coming back to the example which I'm referring to. So this point or this line represents my var. But I want to find a a confidence interval next to this var number. That means next to this standard deviation. It can be on this side and this side, because I'm looking at a confidence interval. But when I want to find the confidence interval, I primarily need this middle point, which is 1.645. Okay, I will do plus and minus. There'll be some Z value or critical value. Generally, we take Z critical values. And then I also need standard error. So this standard error is what I will have to find first. Okay, standard error for my var. And then I will use it in the entire calculation. So only if you look at this entire discussion with the entire sum that we're going to be looking at, the major point that they are talking about is finding that standard error. Once we find the standard error, there is the further process is very simple. It is simply multiplying the Z value, Z critical value, and going down and going up. That's the only thing. But in the historical example that we did in level 1, we were given straightforward standard deviation. In this case, we have to find the standard deviation, that too specific for var. Okay, so that is the main crux. Now, if I take you towards the book, okay, why are we finding this standard confidence interval? Because if we do not, if we did any mistake in the calculation of var, okay, or for example, if my var estimator is not reliable, then my standard error will be very high and my confidence interval will be very vast. Right? Because if I've done any mistake, then my standard error should be ideally high. This is similar to your sample movement, similar to your hypothesis testing chapter, where we were saying that if my sample finding methodology is incorrect, if there was some biasness in my sample, then whenever I'm finding the confidence interval around my mean X bar, it will have a bigger confidence interval because my standard error was high. Okay. So over here, the discussion that we want to talk about is we want to find whether the coherent risk measure that we have found, how much reliable it is. So we are going and finding the standard error and the confidence interval. I'm taking a quick pause. Read this paragraph, and I hope you have been able to understand the concept that I was talking about. Read this paragraph. All good. I'm assuming everybody has seen that paragraph. If you have larger standard deviation, that means wider confidence interval. Okay, but if we want to find that standard error, obviously the confidence interval, you'll need to first find the standard error. And how do we find standard error? This is not a straightforward process. Okay, if you would remember in the linear regression topic, we talked about standard error of regression, which was square root of SSR divided by n minus k minus 1. Okay, we had some structured formula over here. In this case, we also have a structured formula to find the standard error, but it is dependent more on finding probability of the distribution. Okay, this is my standard error. Okay, and they're trying to find the bins. What is bin? Bin primarily means the class. Okay, so if I take you towards the basics of histogram, so when you create histogram, you basically create classes and you create pillars. Okay, histogram is generally created for continuous distribution. So if you're going to start from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40, the bin means this gap. So my bin is 10. Okay. Now what they're simply doing in our example, they have got this 1.645. Okay. So they are trying to find a lower point over here and the higher point over here. Okay. Is everybody able to hear me properly? Give me a quick confirmation. Right? Gaurav, I think so you'll have to rejoin the meeting. Okay, perfect. Okay. Gaurav, kindly rejoin the meeting. Now, so what they are doing is they are creating a bin. Okay, and the size of that bin is denoted by H. And that bin is indirectly created like this, right next to it. Basically means they have found a data point right below the R var value and right above the var value. Okay, so I'm just taking the connection back to my example. I'm taking the connection back to my example. Okay, so in this case, what they have done is, if suppose it is one, if this is suppose 1.6, okay, so they have got 1.7 and 1.5. They've got 1.7 and 1.5. This primarily means they have taken, they've got a lower point and upper point to get a bin. This bin size is H. Okay, and I'll show it to you in the example when we solve what exactly this reference out to be. Okay, read this first two lines. Okay, read the first two lines. All good? So they're talking about this bin with the size of H, and they are also referring to about some Q. Okay, we will talk about that Q when we look at the actual sum. Okay, and using the data points from this bin. Okay, okay, I'm taking a quick pause. Why are you facing this problem? I'm not sure. Is everybody able to hear me properly, see the screen properly? I'm on the I'm directly on the Swagger book. Okay, so in case something like this happens, I would request you guys to kindly rejoin the meeting, because I have not done anything different. I'm just on the Swagger book, and most of the participants are able to hear and see the screen properly. That's the reason. Okay. Okay, I'm coming back to the logic over here, the concept that I was talking about. So once we got these bin or these two values in the example that I said 1.7 and 1.5, we will use this to find the standard error. Okay, that I will explicitly talk about in the sum. And if you look at this formula type that they've given you, this is nothing explicitly very strong. What they're trying to do is, suppose this Q, okay, is my var. So suppose this is my Q, the var point. I'm just going down and going up. So when I go down, I'm using this value. When I'm going up, I'm using this value. Okay, so primarily I'm trying to create a confidence interval. I'm trying to create a confidence interval. Sorry, this is the lower value. My bad, because there is a minus over here, and this is a higher value in terms of absolute point. See, the var is in negative data sense. Hence, you will find the lower side being bigger. I'll explain you when we do that sum. Okay. So let us go to this example market as star. Generally, I have not seen exam being asking this question, primarily because it is slightly lengthy and you have to remember the formula of finding standard error. That is one of the reason. Okay. Now, what they're trying to find is they have found a 5% var. Okay, 5% var, and they're finding a 90% confidence interval right next to var. Okay, so first point being, what is a 5% var number? If I want to pick up that number, it has to be this now, 1.65, negative 1.65. This is my var number. If suppose I want to create a confidence interval right next to this point, okay, So what will I be doing? Okay, so I will be taking this Q, which is my negative 1.65. And since I'm taking 90% confidence interval, okay, and confidence interval is two tail, right? So what is the 90% confidence interval critical value? Come on, guys, 90% confidence interval critical value. It's a two tail data point. It's again 1.65. Again 1.65, fairly simple, right? Hence, in the example or the book that you see, okay, they have used it twice. So this one is my var point. This is 5% var. Okay, and this point, which is 1.6, this is coming because of the confidence interval. I hope everybody is able to connect. So don't get confused because of that. Okay, in the first part, they've explicitly only talking about how to create a confidence interval. Nothing extraordinary. Okay, now we will be entering into looking at the standard error. Okay, and how have they found out this? Okay, look at this point. They have used a bin. Okay, that bin of 0.1. Okay, now primarily 0.1 means they have got the total size of the bin right next to this value is 0.1. So we'll have to go 0.5 down, 0.05 down, and 0.05 up. Okay, to get those two values. Okay, and what are these two values? Okay, please understand this is negative side. So ideally it is going to be negative 1.7 and negative 1.6. Right? This is how we have found these two values, and that is being referred over here. Okay, is everybody clear on how we are getting 1.7 and 1.6? Is everybody okay with this? Okay, assume the bin size is already given in the question. So we have taken directly from there. This is an important step because if you do not understand what is this 1.7 and 1.6, then you won't be able to go ahead. Okay, now I'm taking you back to the distribution part. Okay, so our intention is to find, one second. Our intention is to find, suppose if this is the distribution, this is my 1.7, this is my 1.65, this is my 1.6. Okay, so what I want to find is I want to find this gap. I want to find the probability between this gap or between this bin. Okay, so one of the ways I can do it is I can find this area. Okay, let me put it as A. I can find this area, which is B. Okay, if I take 1 minus A minus B, this should give me this percentage. Is everybody okay with this part? And this is what they have done. This is what they have done. Okay, this A which we are talking about, which this is the A which I was referring about, they have given this A as a reference of P. Okay, and they have tried to find the gap. Okay, let me take you towards the book. Let me take you towards the book. So when we are so the left tail probability P is the area to the left of negative 1.7. What does that mean? That essentially mean this is negative 1.7. I'm talking about this area. This is my P. Okay, this is my P. So what you can do primarily is you can go to the standard normal distribution and you can find what is the area below negative 1.7. And they have gone to that and they have found this number. They have found this number 0.045. Okay, simple. Now they went to the next side. What they did is they took the distribution, they got 1.6. They found the area above this part, above 1.6, or they have written it as loss less than negative 1.6. Less than means on the right hand side. So they have got this value of 0.945. Okay, so If I take 1 minus A minus B, I will get this 0.01. This is the gap or the probability between that bin, and that is nothing but your FQ or the density of that area. All good. I'm purposely going slow on this side to make sure that everybody is in sync. Okay, 0.01, everybody is good. Now once we got this 0.01 and the P part, the both will be used in the formula which has been given over here. This formula, okay, I don't expect that they will ask you to calculate this formula. Even if they ask you, they will give you the formula directly, ideally. Okay, so this is the formula of your standard error. So if you look at this formula properly, okay, what they're simply doing is, okay, they're trying to find the standard error in a very crude method, if crude way. How exactly? Okay, do you guys remember the standard deviation formula for your Bernoulli distribution? What was that? PQ, right? So they are doing the same thing, okay? And when we want to find the standard deviation, normally, or basically the variance of it, so we divide by n, okay? If I do a square root, okay, standard deviation, we have to do square root, right? So we are taking the entire square root over here. Okay, this is my numerator. What was the formula for variance of the Bernoulli distribution? P into Q. What was Q? 1 minus P. Okay, and that is where I basically divide by n, because I'm actually finding the standard deviation, okay, of the binomial, because there are a lot of n data points, right? It is not only single, because Bernoulli was single, binomial was n data points. And then when that was variance, if I take a square root, I'll get the standard deviation. That becomes a new numerator. So only thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the standard deviation in the numerator and dividing it by the bin or the density of that gap. If you see that formula properly. If it is sample, then it is n minus 1. If it is population, it is n. And since we are taking huge number of iteration, we have to assume that it is population. Okay, I'm just trying to explain you the logic, nothing else. Specifically for the exam, I don't expect you to remember the formula. Okay, and once you have got the standard error, you just have to use this over here to find that interval. Okay, so my confidence interval is going to be, the gap is going to be this. Okay, I'm just taking a quick pause over here. Give me a quick confirmation if you guys are good with this sum. If you guys are able to understand the logic of the sum. If you look at the sum twice, you'll be able to, it'll become very clear the flow and what is happening over here. Yes, Jinesh, what is the query that you have? Yes, Jinesh, what is the query that you have?
Hello, sir.
Hmm?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. In this, the final answer, it should be a range, right? And we are getting only one answer.
No. So this is, I think so, a printing mistake over here. If I'm not wrong, they have given the gap. If I'm not wrong.
Okay.
But it is simply the standard confidence interval. You will get a lower value, you will get a higher value.
Okay.
Okay, I'm moving toward the next part. Okay, next this section. Now, what I expect from you guys is to look at this formula properly, the standard deviation formula, standard error formula properly. Okay, and think about this. If I increase my n, and I want you guys to answer. If I increase my n in this formula, what is going to happen with my numerator? Will my numerator become smaller or bigger? Smaller. When the numerator is becoming smaller, my standard error should also go down. Fairly simple. The standard error should also go down. That is the first situation. Okay. Second situation could be, if suppose if I increase the denominator FQ, if I increase that gap and the probability between 1.7 and 1.16, that gap is increasing, the probability will also increase. That means my denominator will also increase. When the denominator increases, my standard error will go down primarily. Right? This was second situation. Look at third situation. If my P increases, what is my P? How can my P increase? If I look at the data point, see if this was the data point of 1.7, this was my P. If I move this 1.7 to this side, and suppose if I have 1.3, then the P will be higher. So if my P increases, okay, then primarily my standard error also increases. This is just looking at the formula, nothing else. And this is what they have been talking about. Read this point. Also over here, they have given the maximum that the numerator can be P into 1 minus P when the P is 0.5. Then only the multiplication is going to be 0.5 into 0.5, which will give you the maximum answer. Read these three paragraphs. Okay, I'm assuming everybody is reading this point. It is just connecting it back to those logic. FQ, that means the density of the bin, the N, and also the P. How exactly it is going to impact your standard error. Once the standard error is getting impacted, your confidence interval will also get impacted. Okay, the first point, that the first situation that I talked about is this N. The second situation that I talked about is FQ. And the third situation I talked about is P. Okay. Also read the last line. Read last paragraph. What they're talking about is that the way we have found a confidence interval for VAR, we can do the same for expected shortfall also. All good till here? I'm moving towards quantile plot. Okay, now this section is important, double star for the exam, theoretical, and it's a very easy section. Okay, I'll try to cover this with my PPT. One second. Okay, I hope everybody is able to see the screen. Quantile plots. Quantile plots. So what does quantile plot primarily talks about? See, whenever I want to do any parametric approach, okay, because I hope you remember from level 1 that whenever we are using parametric approach, we have to make assumption regarding the underlying data. Okay, suppose the underlying, if we are making an underlying assumption that the underlying data is normally distributed, then we can go and use the delta normal approach. That is where your Z comes into picture. But if our assumption is wrong and the data is something else, then whatever VAR we are calculating will not give you the true picture. Hence, before calculating VAR, we can use this quantile tool to help us understand that whatever was my assumed distribution, we can call this assumed distribution as theoretical distribution. Okay, and whatever is my empirical data. What is empirical data? The actual data. Is it actually matching or not? Okay, because if it is matching, then we can assume that distribution and run the VAR calculation. But if there is a mismatch, then it will lead to incorrect VAR calculation. Okay, so these 2 points, which is at the bottom, you have to remember, okay, to easily understand QQ plot. What is empirical data? Empirical distribution data. It is the actual data point. What is theoretical? That is something we assumed. Okay, so what we will try to do is we will first plot the theoretical distribution, that means the assumed distribution, and then we will map our distribution on it to see if it exactly matches or not. To see if it exactly matches or not. Okay. And when we do that matching, okay, it is done in a particular way. Read this first paragraph, first two paragraph. Read that first two paragraph. It gives you a view that, okay, we are going to be using quantile plot. Okay. By using a graph, we are going to, the process mapping is going to happen through graph. And why do we say quantile and quantile? Okay. So we'll first put the all quantiles of the theoretical distribution, and then we'll try to put the empirical distributions quantile on it to see exactly if it matches. Okay. When we are saying quantile, it primarily means this. Okay. Suppose if this is my theoretical distribution, that means assumed distribution. This is my empirical, which is my actual data. So what we are going to be looking at, okay, suppose there is a point over here, which is say negative 1.645, which is at 5%. Okay. What is the point over here, which is coming at 5%? So we will first put this negative 1.65, and then we'll try to put this above the data point to see if it is exactly matching or not. Okay, I'll show you in a diagram so that it helps you to better understand. Okay, so normally the QQ plot is linear. Okay, because the theoretical distribution, assumed distribution, is first put, and then we have to identify whether our distribution, the actual data, is it matching the assumed distribution or not. How exactly does it look? Can we see this diagram? Okay, now obviously in this diagram, I'm just zooming in. I'm just, one second. Sorry, I'm just zooming in. In this diagram, actually there is a line. This line, first we have plotted this line. This line was my theoretical distribution. That means my assumed. And then I started putting these dots. These dots, which you can see on the screen. Okay, these dots, sorry, really sorry, this is because of the PDF file. But these dots are my actual the data of the distribution, the empirical data, and we are trying to map it. So can we see that it is exactly falling on that straight line? When it is exactly falling on the straight line, that essentially means my actual data and my assumed data matches. My actual data and my assumed data matches. Okay, read this entire paragraph. It's a very simple concept, and we'll look at few of the examples also to understand how the distributions cannot match. Okay, now let me show you a diagram. Suppose if I'm creating a quantile plot. Okay, this is my theoretical distribution, and what I'm doing is I'm putting my empirical data or the actual data on this line to see if it is exactly falling on the same quantile or not. So on the middle points, I could see that everything is falling in place. Okay, suppose, but on the tails, it is not falling in line. Okay, suppose I see the tail going like this. Okay, what does it mean? That this tail is becoming more steep. What does steep means? Steep means you're going towards the y-axis. Is everybody able to see that? This tail is becoming more steep. When the tail is becoming more steep, it means it is fatter than the assumed distribution. I'm just showing you a shortcut to identify. Okay. There can be one more scenario like this. Look at this. If suppose my tail becomes like this, if suppose my data was like this, that means in this case, my tail is becoming more flatter. It is going toward the x-axis. When that is a situation, when the tail is becoming more flatter, it essentially means it is thinner than assumed distribution. Is everybody with me till here? Is everybody able to understand what I am talking about? Right? So that I can take you towards one more example. Look at this. Look at this diagram, guys. Shivam, kindly look at this. Do we see that this tail is becoming steeper? That means look at this line that I'm drawing. It is going towards y-axis, right, Shivam? So it has to be what? Is the tail fatter or thinner? Is the tail fatter or thinner? I've just asked you to write something. Going back to the example, if it is becoming steeper, then you're fatter than the assumed distribution. Right? Yes, over here, it is fatter on both the sides. On both the sides. Can we see on the negative side and on the positive side? The tails are fatter. Right? Read this paragraph. Shivam, kindly read this section also. And why is it actually coming as fatter? Because the slide also talks about that my assumed distribution was normal, but my actual data was T distribution with 5 degree of freedom. If you are going to take T distribution with lower degree of freedom, it will obviously have heavier, a fatter tail as compared to the normal distribution, which is actually replicated in the diagram. Right? Yes. Okay, perfect. We'll see one more question also coming on this line. So this is what the QQ plot primarily tells you, whether my actual assumed data and my actual data matches or not. Okay. If we suppose see something like this, this is my theoretical distribution, assumed one. I see something like this. So center is exactly matching. And something like this is happening. Then what does it mean? My left tail, which is represented by this, is heavy. But my right tail is thin or light. Is everybody able to understand that? All good? Okay. Now, this was the basic. So this is one, we talked about one of the ways through which your QQ plot is going to help you. Okay. So if I go toward the first point, okay, it is talking about the same thing. If you read this first point, I hope everybody is able to see the screen properly. If you want, I will just zoom in on the first point. What does this first point talks about? It tells you whether your actual data matches with your assumed distribution or not. If everything falls on the same line, then it means your assumed distribution and actual data matches. That means we can go ahead and do the VAR analysis as required. Okay. All good. The next thing, which the second important thing which your QQ plot primarily talks about is this. What is the intercept and the slope of the data? Now, if you look at this diagram, okay, we can see that the center of the data is close to 0. Okay, and the slope, okay, of the line, okay, which the assumed line, okay, this is close to 1. Now, I have not calculated this, but by looking at the data, what we can see, the difference between the standard deviation is equal 1 1 1, like that. Okay, so we can say that this is coming from standard normal distribution. The assumed distribution is standard normal distribution because the mu is close to 0 average and sigma seems to be 1. That is being highlighted over here. So in a very simple language, QQ plot helps you to identify what is your assumed distribution also by looking at the diagram. Okay, kindly read that second point. Let us go toward the third point. We have already discussed about this. QQ plot helps you to identify whether your tail is fatter or thinner as compared to assumed distribution. We just now talked about this. And if you look at this diagram, on both the side, left and the right side, both are fatter as compared to the assumed distribution, because your tails are becoming more steep. Fairly simple. This was the third point. What is the fourth point which your QQ plot helps you to identify is that if there is any outlier in the data. Now look at this diagram properly. Can we see over here at the top? I'm just marking it over here. There are data points which are far away from the average. Okay, similarly, there are certain data points which are far away from the average. So your QQ plot will be able to help you to identify whether there is any outlier in the data point or not. Okay. I'm taking a quick pause. Are we guys good till this point? Give me a quick confirmation on chat. These 4 pointers are not there in your book. Fairly simple. So I'm just going through the book now. Okay. And primarily, this is the same discussion that we are having. What they are focusing on is that they're telling you that, okay, it should match exactly. It will be quantile. So if you read this paragraph, they're saying, okay, we'll first have the theoretical distribution, which is, say, for example, standard normal distribution. Then we'll match our empirical distribution. In this case, they have taken the empirical distribution as T. So obviously the tails are going to be heavier. Can you look at this diagram? This is steep. This is steep. So both the side, it is fatter. Both the tails are fatter. The reason it is fatter because your assumed distribution was standard normal distribution and this distribution or T distribution. So definitely it has to be fatter. They have just shown you that same logic. Okay, I hope everybody is good till here. So now I'm going to move towards one question. Can you guys see the question on the screen? Okay, what is this question talking about? Primarily, we have last 300 trading days, which is plotted on the histogram, and they've given me the worst 20 daily returns. They're asking me to find 1 day 99% VAR. Okay, so if one day, that means 1%, 99% means 1%. So 1% of 300 is going to be 3. Okay, but the answer is going to be 3 plus 1, the fourth lowest data point. That is going to be negative 0.840. This is my answer. The fourth lowest. The B point, the fourth lowest, which was this. And see, if you read this, in some cases, they have directly taken the third. So Philip Jorian's book, they have directly taken the third data point. This has also been explicitly highlighted over here. But as per our understanding in the Schweitzer book, it is primarily the fourth lowest. All good. Let me take it towards the next question. Over here, we are supposed to find the same question, but now the data is same, but they are asking you to find the expected shortfall for 99%. Okay, same 300 data points, 20 verse data points are given. So your fourth data point is your var, right? So your fourth data point is var. So you have 1, 2, and 3 data points which are above the var of points. You have to take the average. So you have to take the first 3 average data points average. You will get the answer. What would be the answer? A, B, C. Is it C? A lot of people are saying it's C. Kindly cross check. Okay, so let us see if this is the answer. Yes. They have taken the worst 3 data points. They have taken the average and they have directly got this answer. This is just a simple calculation for expected shortfall. Let us look at this diagram, and over here your logic will be checked. Okay, this is the left hand side, this is the right hand side. What do you think about the left hand side? It is becoming more steeper. It is becoming more steeper. So the left hand side has to be heavy. But what about the right hand side? Right hand side is becoming more flatter. That means it is becoming more thinner. So what should be the answer, guys? C. Right? The same logic which you talked about. We give you an example also. Heavy left hand side, right side being very light, and hence it is negatively skewed. Okay, this question might seem very difficult, but it is very simple. Let me take you towards the next question. Each of the following is true except. Read all the options properly. Read all the options properly. What do you think is the answer? D is the answer. Yes. Why? Because in arithmetic return, okay, when we talked about arithmetic return, we explicitly said that the interim cash flows are not reinvested. It is only for the geometric return, and we are looking out for false because rest everything is equal. Why? Because if you look at the options, option C, the difference between arithmetic and geometric return is very, very small when we have taken a short period of time. That was correct. Geometric return, it was there in the book also that if you want to find for multiple period, you just have to add. That was also there in the book. Okay. And also the A point is more logical coming from level 1. The geometric return has to be taken for asset price because it cannot go negative. So all first three are right, and we are going to find the answer as D because that was the incorrect one. Right? Let me take you towards the next question. Come on, guys. Look at the diagram properly. So your assumed distribution should look like this. So in this case, the left hand side is flat or fatter. The right hand side is also fatter. Fairly simple. Right? See, the first point is incorrect. Why? Because whatever is your actual data, it does not match with your assumed distribution. That means it is not actually parametric. It is not matching with your assumed distribution. Okay. Is it positively skewed? No, because both the sides are fat. Do you realize it is leptokurtic? Why? Because when we did a question in level 1, leptokurtic means both the tails are fatter. Okay. Leptokurtic means both the scales are fatter. So my answer is 3. Okay. Answer is C. All good. Let us go to this question. Each of the following is true about the QQ except what? Is A correct? Any distribution that produces a linear QQ plot is a good candidate distribution for our data. This is actually correct. We're looking for incorrect. While the QQ plot is ideal for evaluating kurtosis, it does not effectively evaluate skewness. Is this correct? B1. Think about this. What about C? We can use intercept and slope of the linear QQ plot to get a rough idea of the location and the scale. Location means the average, scale means the standard deviation. This is also correct. QQ plot is good for identifying outliers. We have talked about this. So my answer has to be B, right? Because that is incorrect. All good? I think so. We are done with the questions. Let us go to the questions which were available in the book. We'll first solve. Okay, I've yet to solve the first part, right? What is the first question? The VAR at 95% confidence level is estimated to be 1.56 from the historical simulation of 1000 observation. Which of the following statement is true? So we got, for historical simulation, we got this 1.56. What do you think is the answer? See, where exactly is 1.5? 1.58. So if I draw a diagram, 1.56, your normal distribution says 1.65 is the area. This is 95%. Your historical simulation is saying this 1.5, right? So yes, it is more thinner. Cross check the answer in the back. It is more thinner than the normal distribution. Shivam, kindly cross check. The historical distribution is more thinner, right? Perfect. Let us go towards the next question. The next question they have given, see, primarily, this is slightly, I think so there's some issue with the question because the way they have written it, it does not seems to be correct, okay? But what they're talking about is profit and loss data. They've got this $20 million standard deviation of this. They're finding the 5% one. So there's no question of calculating over here, but they're only trying to find, is it what is the probability of, how do we represent this $3.5 million? Kindly look at the options. Since we are only talking about the loss, because this $20 million is primarily going to be the loss data point. The VAR number is going to be the loss data point. And I want you to read the solution also for this question, because they've written it in a very slide. I think so they've got the answer of D, if I'm not wrong. If I'm not wrong. Okay. They've got D, right? But the way they have shown you the answer, I'll go to the answer now for you guys to see. Read this section. See, the calculation was not required because we have already seen the number are given. Okay, since the expected loss is negative and VAR is implied for a negative amount, the interpretation is that XYZ will earn less than $3.5 million, 5%. That means less than $3.5 million earning, positive earning. Okay. So these two lines are very complicated. They have just not written it in a proper way. Okay. But the answer is D, primarily because 95% of the time it is going to be at least $3.5 million earning and greater. Because if you look at this diagram, this side is 95%. Right? So this has to be the area which they've given the answer in a indirect way. They've given the answer in the indirect way. See, it's only always the same. You're talking in terms of loss. So you can say 5% loss area or the 95% other side. You can say in both the terms. Okay. I'm taking you towards the second quiz, which we have not done till now. Module quiz 1.2. Which of the following statement about expected shortfall and coherent risk measure are true? What do you think, guys, is the answer? What do you think, guys? See, this question is primarily related to, see, this expected shortfall was only taking into consideration the tail, right? The tail points, but coherent takes all of them. But if you read the option, okay, if you read the option, you have to, in such kind of question, you have to eliminate the options. So if you look at D, what does it talk about? Coherent risk measure estimate quantiles for tail region only. This is straight away wrong. Look at C, estimated shortfall, the expected shortfall, estimate quantile for tail region and coherent risk measure for non-tail only. That means only non-tail. Now this is also incorrect. Look at A, expected shortfall and coherent risk measure for gives estimate quantiles for the entire distribution. No, expected shortfall is only for the tail. So this was incorrect. Now why B is correct? Because see, if you look at this point, what they're saying, expected shortfall is going to look for tail and coherent risk measure is also going to look for tail, but it is not saying that it is only tail for coherent risk measure. Hence the answer is B. Hence the answer is B. Sushil, kindly read the options properly. All good? Let us go to the next question. Which of the following statement most likely increases standard error? How exactly the standard error is going to get increased? If I'm going to increase, see, they're talking about two things, the sample size and the P, and the P. Okay. Now when I want to increase my standard error. So if I decrease my sample size, this one, then my numerator will become bigger, right? And also if I increase my P, the numerator is going to be bigger because numerator is going to be highest at 0.5 and 0.5. So answer is what? See, this is again coming from that formula point which we talked about. Next point, quantile plot is best used for what purpose? What do you think, guys? There were two things, theoretical and empirical. Theoretical distribution is assumed and empirical distribution is actual. What do you think? Is it C or D? We are not testing, we are actually identifying whether what exactly the purpose of QQ plot is, whether my theoretical distribution, okay, this is my theoretical distribution, whether my empirical distribution actually comes from theoretical distribution or not. Answer is C. Kindly cross check. Okay, is everybody okay till here? Are we done with the chapter? Come on, guys, give me a quick confirmation.